The legislature is back in session. We are now on second reading on bill number 32, which is the first bill on our agenda. The clerk has passed out an amended agenda. It says on the bottom, as amended. All right, Senator St. Augustine, you are recognized on bill number 32-34.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place bill number 32-34 COR as corrected by the prime sponsor, amended by the Committee on Appropriation and Adjudication, an act to amend section 28202A and section 28202C of Article 2, Chapter 28 of Title 17, Guam Code Annotated, relative to the tuition and fees benefit for merit award recipients under the Student Financial Assistance Program for Higher Education, in the third reading file, and to discuss it.
Please proceed, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My colleagues, this bill will allow monies under the Merit Recipient Program to spread out further and benefit more students under the Merit Recipient Program at the University of Guam. This bill will help the long-term sustainability of the program, as well as allow more students to benefit from the Student Financial Assistance Program. Students who receive Merit Recipient Program and is approved under the federal Pell Grant will utilize the Pell Grant instead, and Merit Recipient monies would then revert to the Merit Recipient students and scholarship. For 2017 academic year, there were 215 students in the Merit Award Program with a total expenditures of $2,420,713. For 2018 academic year, as of the fall semester, we have a total of 216 Merit Award students. We estimate expenditures levels similar to the previous academic year. The bill will follow and make merit a last dollar award, allowing us to leverage federal Pell Grant first. A merit student eligible for Pell who will receive their Pell Award first to pay tuition and fees, with any remaining tuition and fees balance paid for by the merit program. Current Pell Grant max award is $6,095. Of the 216 merit students, approximately 83 students are eligible for Pell Grant. Under the current law, these students receive both their full Pell Grant and their merit award, essentially getting a double award for tuitions and fees. By converting Pell to last dollar scholarship, we can save an estimate of $364,592, which goes back into the scholarship fund for use by other students. Legislation does not, this legislation does not cost the government any additional money, but has the potential to save over $300,000 to up to $400,000. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the motion to place bill number 32-34, is there any other senator who would like to be recognized? Senator Espadon, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I definitely rise in support of the concept of this bill. I do have a question, though, just in the language, and maybe if the sponsor would yield to a question. And the question is that what we're amending to the law, it says, except that merit award recipients who are eligible to receive the federal Pell Grant shall have their Pell Grant applied to the tuition and fee charges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The wording to me, who are eligible, I guess the question is, are all recipients eligible for a federal Pell Grant?
Senator St. Augustine, would you yield to that question?
Yes, Madam Speaker. As a matter of fact, my early statements, out of 216 merit students, approximately 83 students are eligible. Not all, but there are 83 because of the requirements, the certain income bracket they will fall under.
Senator Espadon.
Madam Speaker, the reason why I raise that, because now it begs the question that if you are eligible but don't receive a Pell Grant, then what happens?
Would you like
I
that?
mean, in other words, you've been eligible, but you weren't awarded a Pell Grant, but by the language here, you were eligible to receive and shall have that Pell Grant applied to the tuition. So I'm just wondering if that might cause a problem for a student who is eligible or does not receive a Pell Grant, and whether or not that poses any kind of a situation that we did not foresee.
Is that another question you would like the author to yield to?
Yeah. And
Senator
again,
Augustine.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It'll be amendable to, we amend it to read maybe who are eligible and receive the Pell Grant. Then that's when the Pell Grant would take forward. Because I understand exactly where you come from.
Yeah.
That if they're eligible, that doesn't mean they're getting the grant.
Right.
And until they receive it, then that's where the Pell Grant will go forward. If you would like to author an amendment,
Actually, I would, because that addresses the concern, and I think that's a very viable solution. So after the word eligible, accept merit award students who are eligible and receive. So you just strike the word to and replace it with the word and. That way it's very clear that you have to be eligible and receive the Pell Grant before this piece of legislation or this policy kicks in. So that's my motion to amend. Just replace the word to after the word eligible, and it'll be who are eligible and receive the federal Pell Grant.
On the amendment to change the word to and, is there any objection? Hearing no objection, motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand in full support of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. On the motion, Senator Nicholas, you are recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to inquire with the author. Basically what this bill will do is if a student was eligible for the merit scholarship, they'll receive that. But if they're also eligible for the Pell Grant, then their Pell Grant shall first be used for their tuition expenses. I wanted to inquire what happens with the merit scholarship money that was not used because the Pell Grant supplemented it.
Would you like the author to yield to that, Senator? Senator St. Augustine, do you yield to the question?
Yes, Madam Speaker. The funds will actually be reverted back to the merit program so that other students may participate in that. Now we'll just have more students on the merit program.
Senator St. Nicholas.
I appreciate the author for that answer because the way the merit scholarship is awarded is it's given out on a per student basis based on the number of graduates. And so, for example, let's say you had X number of graduates and it authorized for five merit scholarships. That means that the sixth highest graduate didn't get the merit scholarship. And so is the mechanisms in place for whatever funding was not spent on the first merit scholarship or any of the previous 5 merit scholarships to automatically waterfall into the 6th and into the 7th of the same graduating class? Because realistically speaking, if they were able to take advantage of something like this being in place, then they would have been the next immediate recipient of the merit award. And so my concern is if the money reverts back into the merit scholarship program, is that kind of being banked for future students? And the reality is that, you know, the subsequent students in that same class in which this particular Pell Grant offset is being applied, they should be the ones to be afforded the merit scholarship because they would have gotten it if that individual wasn't receiving it in the same class. So I guess my next question, Madam Speaker, is is there a mechanism in place to already ensure that whatever isn't spent on merit scholarships for one particular class waterfalls into the next eligible students, or does that money just get banked into the merit program and has to wait until the next award cycle? Because if that's the case, one of the unintended consequences is we're going to be having money sitting in a pot that could have been being spent or being used to help offset the cost of students going to school, which was part of the whole purpose of us establishing the merit program to begin with. So that's my question, Madam Speaker, is there already an existing mechanism in place for any unexpended merit funds in any particular award year to automatically waterfall into the next recipients within a particular class? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So, is that a question that the author can yield to? Senator Sinoxine, do you yield?
Yes, Madam Speaker, today there's nothing in place, but it'll be something that we could actually inquire from Dr. Christ, the President, to make sure they put it in place so that we can extend it to the number 7 or number 11 student on the following year, because if this passes, then it's a start in that direction. Because there's a lot of money out there on the federal side.
I appreciate the answer from the author. I can see that this bill, I think definitely does a very good thing in that we're not going to be layering, we're not going to be losing federal money because we're spending local funds prior to utilizing the federal funds that could have been used. But at the same time, too, I think the second half of the chapter that we do need to close the book on is, if that money isn't being used because the federal funds are being able to come in on the front end, how can we make sure that we're making the best utilization of those funds on the back end? And I think that's something that should be incorporated into the bill, but also, to time constraints notwithstanding, we do not have the luxury within this, this 34th Guam Legislature to send this bill back to committee and to try and do another rework of the language to incorporate that mechanism. So I guess for the record, Madam Speaker, I'd just like to put on notice whomever is the incoming chair of higher education, that this might be something that they take into consideration as one of their priorities, so that the next cycle of merit awardees in the 35th Guam Legislature that get awarded when they graduate from high school, in the coming months, they're able to have that all sorted out before those actual awards take place. But that notwithstanding, Madam Speaker, I rise in full support of the bill, absent that other component, but I'm confident that the 35th will tackle that. I think that this is another example of how we just need to make sure that we're putting things in the right order, so that we're not losing local resources because we're not fully utilizing available federal resources for the same objective. So I'd like to commend the author for the bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the bill, on the motion to place bill number 32-34 on the third reading file, Senator Sinoxine, you may close. He's waived closing. So is there any objection to placing bill number 32-34 on the third reading file? Hearing no objection, motion carries. We're on bill number 57-34. Senator Rodriguez, you are recognized.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move to place bill 57-34 as corrected by the prime sponsor and further amended on the floor on the third reading. Be allowed to discuss the measure.
So this is a motion to amend on the floor. Is there any objection to that amendment?
And if I may, before you call it, Madam Speaker, the only amendment that was made was the date on page 10. It called for the establishment of this program on October 1st, 2017, and so it was changed to October 1st, 2020, just because this was introduced earlier in the year. That's the only change to this bill.
All right. If I may ask you, Senator, to correct the title to read as corrected by the prime sponsor and further substitute it on the floor.
Okay.
And on that motion to adopt this version on the floor to substitute it, is there any objection? Hearing no objection, the the bill substituted on the floor. You may proceed, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill 57-34 seeks to implement a community paramedicine program on Guam. This program is designed to address specific local problems and take advantage of locally developed linkages and collaborations between and among emergency medical service. Our island has long suffered from a chronic shortage of home health service. The community paramedicine program supplements but does not replace these services. It adds a level of quality, pre-hospital medical care to our existing home health services and supplements the early identification of medical issues prior to emergency transport to a hospital. Guam is fortunate to have highly qualified EMS providers already integrated into a larger health care system. This program, with some additional training, will fill a vital role in maintaining the health for the people of Guam. The program can start simply with EMS personnel visiting patients recently discharged from the hospital and checking in with them in their homes. As training and the program process evolve, it can grow to wound checks, diabetic monitoring, video conferencing with primary care providers. The cost for such program is minimal and is not operationally intrusive. This program also fits the culture of our people. We know our neighbors and our communal attitude are ingrained. We have village fire stations and are familiar with the fire department staff that work in our villages. This program, therefore, takes something very familiar to us and puts it soundly in our community. Having our fire personnel visiting our patients in our villages seems a natural thing. Design and implementation of the community paramedicine program requires the collaboration of many organizations, including the Department of Public Health and Social Services, the Guam Fire Department, the Guam Memorial Hospital, and Guam Community College. The EMS Commission is particularly well suited to take on the planning and implementation for this program, as its membership brings the required requisite expertise to create quality service. A community paramedicine program makes sense. It utilizes existing resources. It meets a critical need. It improves our healthcare system. It prevents readmissions to the hospital. It reduces the isolate feeling of our people in the most critical time. It expands the roles and adds on an additional career path for our EMS personnel. To make it happen only requires our EMS Commission to plan, organize, budget, and implement. I'm asking my colleagues to please support me on this measure. This measure, Madam Speaker, is really part of a whole system of care approach to dealing with our healthcare challenges. A lot of times we know that our people end up in the emergency room when really they don't need to be in the emergency room. If there was some sort of constant interaction with our EMS within the villages, those are some of the benefits that we can see in this type of program. So I'm asking my colleagues to please support me in this program. It will take some time for us to be able to implement it. The cost, if any, is minimal, as I mentioned, but it's a program that is worth pursuing. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the motion to place Bill number 57-34 on the third reading file, is there any senator who would like to be recognized? Senator Rodriguez, you may close on the bill. All right. Is there any objection to placing Bill number 57-34 on the third reading file? Hearing no objection, motion carries. Can we take a 2-minute recess? 2 minutes? Senator Atta, you're recognized. You're recognized on Bill 154.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move to place Bill number 154-34 COR as corrected by the prime sponsor and amended by the Committee on Environment, Land, Agriculture, and Procurement Reform into the third reading, and I'd like to discuss it.
This is the reported out version.
Yes, Madam Speaker.
All right, please proceed.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. Guam's signage laws is about 40 years old, and the only thing that's really authorized to be put up there are the on-premise signs. And those are the signs that you would find on buildings advertising what products or services are being provided in those buildings that the sign is on. Over the years, we have found that technology is now able to basically, well, we've seen around the island, the off-premise signs. And these are signs that you would see, they're electronic signs, and they are basically advertising services that are not necessarily found on the premises where that sign is located, but may be found elsewhere. A good example of these off-premise signs you would find is there's a electronic sign right across the street from the FHP in Tamuning. There's also another electronic sign that's at the intersection of Route 1 and Airport Road. Now, those signs are currently existing, and they are existing because of a public law that was recently passed, Public Law 34-30, and that law was just passed on July of 2017. And what that law did was it basically made all those signs or signs that have gotten approvals to be constructed to proceed as was approved earlier, and so that's why those signs are still standing. With the passage of Bill 154, what that will do is that then it provides, one, it specifically it will specifically authorize the construction of off-premise signs, and will provide certain regulations on these signs. For example, we certainly don't want our environment to be peppered with these large off-premise signs such that, you know, it's just a big clutter driving down Marine Drive. And so what the bill does is, for example, on page 9 of the bill, it regulates the interval between signs. So if you take a look at the sign that's in front of Docomo, there's a sign there right now. 3,500 feet coming down towards Agana would place you right about where Citibank is at. And so with this bill regulating the interval, you will not find, for example, signs in between that interval. It also provides regulation in terms of setbacks. So a sign is allowed to be constructed 100 feet from an intersection and to be set back 10 feet from the property line. Now, we know that one size does not fit all, and so we need to make provisions for variances. So, for example, let's say that the 3,500 foot mark will put you right in the middle of a side street going in, and so maybe where it's feasible to erect or construct the sign is at a 3,400 foot interval. So the bill does provide provisions by giving the Guam Land Use Commission additional authorities to actually then deal with, on page 15 of the bill in section 4, it gives the Guam Land Use Commission additional authority to deal with variances, to deliberate on petitions dealing with variances, and be able to dispose of those petitions. So I think this bill is certainly it provides a happy medium. Then it permits off-premise signs. It does provide some sort of regulation so that we are not cluttering our environment out there with signs all over the place. And it also provides for a provision where variances can be dealt with. So with that, I ask my Madam Speaker, I do have a couple of corrections that amendments that I would like to make. They're more so technical corrections. So if I may, on page 9, in the minimum setback and interval on line 12, it reads 100 feet from the edge of road. It should read 100 feet from the closest point of the intersection. So that's an amendment then, is to correct that language to read 100 feet from the closest point of the intersection instead of from the edge of road.
Could you please state the line number? We're on page 9.
Page 9, line 12, in that box where it says minimum distance. It says so it should read 100 feet from the closest point of the intersection.
On the amendment. Is there anyone who would like to be recognized on the amendment? Senator Espaldon, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I guess the closest point of the intersection, and I'm just wondering if that's specific enough. Right now, I believe the way that it's measured, the closest point, the closest point to the intersection is really the middle of the intersection, and then, of course, before this amendment, the way it reads is from the edge of the road. And now we're going to change it to the closest point of the intersection. And so I think we here might be able to understand what's being talked about, but anybody else who might be looking at this law, will they understand that the closest point of the intersection is the intersection located, as in previous law, at the middle of the intersection? Or is it located at the edge of the sidewalk to the intersection? And I'm just not sure that this language, I understand what he's trying to do, but I'm not sure it would be interpreted as the general public goes to the laws to try to understand where the measurement starts. And I just kind of pose that concern at this point. Only because existing law right now, as I understand it, like I stated earlier, is the middle of the intersection, right in the middle of the road. And then, like I said, from the language in the bill, it says from the edge of the road, and now we're going to change it to the closest point of the intersection. Is the closest point, is the intersection in the middle of the road, or is the intersection the edge of the sidewalk? I don't know, and I raise that just for a matter of to be thought about and to contemplate whether this is the right language. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment. Yeah, should we take a 1-minute recess, Senator, to confirm that language, or? Senator, would you like to state that on the record, maybe for the benefit of all the senators, or would you like to take a recess? All right, please.
So, Madam Speaker, there's two setbacks that we're talking about. The first setback is the distance from an intersection, and at the last time we had discussed this bill, there was confusion as to, where's the point that you measure from. Was it at where the intersection crosses? And the clarification I got from Department of Public Works would be then that it's 100 feet from the intersection of that sidewalk, 100 feet from the closest point of the intersection. So the closest point of the intersection will be the edge of roadway of that intersection. All right, and then the second setback we got to deal with is the measurement in from the property line. So the sign has got to be in 10 feet from the property line, and that's the second setback that needs to be met. So, so if you take a look at page 10, that is where the second setback is mentioned on line 12. The minimum setback distance shall be 10 feet from the edge of the property line. And then where we talk about the 100 foot is 100 feet from the intersection, which would be, the closest point really would be the edge of roadway.
Senator Espadon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So perhaps it should read 100 feet from the closest point of the intersection at the edge of the road. That way it might be perfectly clear, as opposed to eliminating the words at the edge of the road. So the measurement would be starting at the edge of the road. So it will be perfectly clear that the measurement will start from the edge of the road back 100 feet. Edge of the road closest to the intersection, and then the setback is 100 feet out. At least it's succinctly clear that that is going to be the measurement. So I would then make this amendment to the amendment to add at the end of the intersection to then add on the words at the edge of the road.
So the amendment, I think we're going to take a 2-minute recess to confirm this language and put it in writing. Thank you. 2-minute recess. We're back in session. Senator Espadon, you have the floor on the amendment.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. So the amendment to the amendment is to include the words, well, it will now read from the intersection 100 feet from the closest point of the intersection at the edge of the road. That is now the amendment to the amendment, and that's what will be discussed. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. So Senator Espadon's amendment is to add the words "at the edge of the road." As to that amendment to the amendment, is there any objection? Anyone who would like to be recognized? Hearing no objection, motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on the same subject, since now that it's been amended, but we're on this section which establishes the minimum distance of signage from the intersection, and right now it's going to be 100 feet. It does raise a concern in my mind, and again, just for full clarification and understanding, if the author of the legislation would at least speak to the issue of what happens to the sign, say, for example, at the ITC intersection. We know that that does not conform to 100 feet from the edge of the road, but they have been displaying signage there for years on end at this point. Does that then require that does this legislation then require that the ITC remove those advertising signs that are in the corner of the intersection of ITC and Marine Drive?
Senator Atta, would you like to yield? Or would you yield to that question?
Yeah. Madam Speaker, that question has been asked a number of times. Under what conditions, what was the discussion that authorized them to put up that sign? I really don't know. It's never been an issue. And quite frankly, even if they told them to take down that sign, that monstrosity of a building still remains. At least with the sign, it puts some colored images up there. But to answer the question, with the passage of this law, does that mean they now have to go and take down that sign? Well, I always thought that when we enact legislation, it's prospective. So I guess the only way to test that is if somebody files a complaint, and then we'll see where it goes. But otherwise, it's never been an issue.
Senator Espadon, you have the floor.
And I'll take that answer, Madam Speaker. It will have to be tested in court maybe down the line if somebody does bring an issue with it, because the legal issue would be that if the existing signs out there that have not been grandfathered in by previous legislation, and a sign such as the signs such as the one at ITC are subject to contest, because first of all, it does not meet the 100-foot minimum setback from an intersection, and moreover, it does not meet a 3,500-foot distance from another existing digital display that has been grandfathered in. Then I would imagine there would be a point of contention somewhere down the road. It's something for us to keep in mind as policymakers, to make sure that we consider the various unintended consequences that this might bring to the community, and subject to perhaps a test in court, which will include legal fees and whatnot to those affected. The other issue is, we were only talking about that at this point. We were only talking about the 100-foot from the edge of the road issue, and so I'll speak on the bill in total later on. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Espadon. We're now back to the Senator Atta's amendment to add the words "from the closest point of the intersection," which has been amended. On Senator Atta's amendment, is there anyone who would like to be recognized? Is there Senator San Agustin?
Madam Speaker, not on his amendment, but on another issue.
Oh, right. So on the Atta amendment, is there any objection to the Senator? Again, you are recognized on the Atta amendment.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I think the question that was posed previously still is a concern. Now, if the decision of this body in moving forward with this legislation becoming law, and we say for the record that it's applicable prospectively, then that would address many of the businesses or individuals that have signage that would be inconsistent with this, but that are presently conforming with existing law before the enactment of this proposal. So I think we need to be clear in this, because we don't want individuals who have been complying with the law or businesses that have been complying with the law and conforming with existing code. Now that this becomes law, they automatically have to go to the courts to get a question responded to, when in fact it's the doing of this body. It's by virtue of the action of this body. So, Madam Speaker, I just want to, at least from my perspective, understand that in fact this proposal, should it be passed into law, would be applicable prospectively, and all the businesses and individuals that own signage that presently are in conformance with law, that it will not automatically transition and now make them non-conforming with the new code. So I just want to make that clear, that my understanding is that yes, any changes in the signage law would be prospective, and it should not require that individuals and businesses that today have signs that are up to have to go to the court to get that answered. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lee, you are recognized on the ADA amendment.
Suzus Masi, Madam Speaker, just a point of information for my colleagues. This bill addresses off-premise signage. ITC intersection, those signs are on-premise, so it's not really part of this discussion.
On the ADA amendment as amended by Senator Spaldon. Senator Adder, you may close on your amendment. All right. Is there any objection to the ADA amendment? Is there any objection to the ADA amendment as amended by Senator Espaldon? Hearing no objection, motion carries. Senator Adder, you still have the floor on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, a second amendment that I need to make is really, and again, it's a technical amendment. On the same page, page 9, that minimum distance information, the interval between signs, it shows there 3,5000. It's got one too many zeros. So the amendment is just to delete 1 0 from that, so that the interval would be 3,500 feet between signs.
On the ADA amendment, is there any objection? Senator Uggan, you are recognized. Is there any objection to the ADA amendment to remove the 0? Hearing no objection, motion carries.
Madam Speaker, I just want a point of information.
Please state your point
Looking at page 4, there was a statement by one of our previous colleagues that said that this particular legislation deals specifically with off-premise signage. But if you look at the definition on page 4 of sign, it reads, a name, identification, description, display, or illustration which is affixed to, painted, or represented directly or indirectly upon a building or other outdoor surface which directs attention, and then it continues to read on. So my interpretation or understanding of that, unless I'm reading it incorrectly, that this, although the title says regulating off-premise signage, that the definition of sign here is reflective of painted or represented directly or indirectly, any signage that is painted or represented directly or indirectly upon a building. So we need to make sure, Madam Speaker, that it goes back to the previous question and the comments that I shared. if there are businesses and individuals that are presently following the law, and then this becomes law, we need to ensure that they're protected without having to go and legally pursue some questions in the courts. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Atta, you still have the floor on the bill. Is there anyone else who would like to be recognized on the bill? Senator Slogstein.
Madam Speaker, in reference to the discussion we've been having, maybe on page 14, line 18, we can change that existing off-premise signage to include existing signage. Instead of using the word off-premise, so to be inclusive of all signs. Because as you leave, any of which has been variance or allowed has been provided that all business license requirements are met thereafter, maintain good standing. In other words, if anybody that currently has a sign such as ITC building, they got a license to do it, and further down by Pizza Hut or further up by the airport, the former Marine Drive-In Theater Road, they can continue, and they would basically be grandfathered. I think that's what my colleagues have been bringing up, is that even though one of the colleagues brought up that we're talking about off-premise, because of the definition of sign, it's inclusive of on-premise. Okay? Right. Understood. Okay? I'm just, maybe legal can help me on that one.
On the bill, Senator Estevez, you're recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have one amendment that's already been circulated. I have another one in the works. Though this one was circulated prior to the amendment, and so before moving forward, I would just like to address to the body that aside from the language that I'm adding, it would be consistent with the amendment to the bill that was already made. I think it was from the closest point of the intersection or like that. Madam Speaker, the amendment I have is on page 9, line 12, and that's to address the minimum distance from the intersection, and specifically it's to kind of specify. So, you know, I'd like to thank the author first for putting this bill together. You know, I do understand it was a lot of work and there are a lot of points to consider. Now, considering something that we also must consider is the difference between static signs and digital signs. There are already a lot of restrictions in the bill, and we do allow the Guam Land Use Commission some variances. However, those variances are under specific criteria that I would say, or actually very vague criteria, unnecessary hardship, or basically unreasonable. So it allows for some variances, but I don't think it really strikes at the heart of the difference between static and digital signs. The reason I'm proposing this amendment is that the usage of static and digital signs are not cookie cutter. For example, in a more developed areas like Tamuning, Tumon, it would probably be more feasible for digital signage, not only to gain the attention and for the marketing strategy, but also because it's competing with the additional lighting in the area that draws attention from the signs. However, this is not the same case for static signage. The reason I'm proposing this amendment, to be specific, is that we should allow for variances for static signs that are probably more indicative for use or could be used and are a lot more cost efficient for usage from different businesses in the South to advertise specific events or for developing industries down south. such as events maybe going on at the pier that we could promote, or at the golf courses down south, Jeff's Pirates Cove. And if we restrict this and allow too much favoritism to the digital sign industry, there's probably a low likelihood of such a large investment into digital signage down south. However, allowing flexibility for static signage, such as the distance from the intersection or adjustments in the size of the face, can allow for an expansion into markets and business from, I guess, an underrepresented area of the island. And so with that, Madam Speaker, understanding that the Guam Land Use Commission does allow for variances, I propose the amendment that on line 9 or line 12, page 9, with the amendments, previous amendments intact, that the section describing the setback of 100 feet be specific, and to add the language for digital signs.
On the Estevez amendment to add the words for digital signs on line 12 of page 9, is there anyone who'd like to be recognized? Senator Lee, you are recognized.
Sutuas Maasi, Madam Speaker. It's my understanding, and I certainly want to commend the author of this bill for taking many of the minimum distance requirements and some of the other requirements that he has laid out in this bill are actually recommendations from the United States Sign Council. And it's important to note that because this is an organization that prides itself on regulating this industry with the primary goal of safety of our community. So it's really important that we keep in mind that this is an attempt to address all off-premise signage, whether it's digital or static. And, you know, driving along the roadway, we can agree that any kind of sign, whether it's digital or static, can present a distraction to the drivers. And so I just really want to caution my colleagues, this 100-foot minimum distance isn't an arbitrary number. This is based on the United States Sign Council, their long-standing research in this area, and we want to encourage the safety of our community. Safety is really paramount here as we're beginning to look at this. So this research is based on the motorist's cone of vision. It seeks to decrease distracted driving, and it provides motorists with sufficient time to be able to adequately detect and read and proceed safely down the roadway. And so this is especially in various types of environment, in a single lane or a double lane highway, in a high-speed multi-lane environment. So these are the considerations that have been taken into account when you're attempting to figure out minimum distances between signs and minimum distances from the roadway. And so with that, I object to this amendment. I don't think that we should be separating digital, the way that we look at digital or static signs. That kind of separating of those requirements isn't done anywhere else in the country. And so again, this minimum distance requirement is being placed into this bill with a lot of research and a lot of thought put behind it. And so I just want to make sure that we continue to treat all off-premise signs the same, with safety of our community being paramount. To Josmasi.
Thank you. On the Estevez amendment, anyone would like to speak on the Estevez amendment? If not, then Senator Estevez, you may close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the sentiments and information provided by this body, members of this body. However, I would like to highlight that Guam is a unique situation. We don't have a plethora of land and options for advertisements, additional routes. But what we are applying is a 3,500 feet minimum distance between the signs. And I've said this before previously, we need to be very careful of how we provide legal monopolies to businesses that have already been grandfathered by this body, which I did support because they acted in good faith. But we have to be careful how we move forward. But you know, it's in this matter, it's a simple science, and I understand. Yes, it's about safety, of course. Now, the Land Use Commission, all I'm asking, Madam Speaker, is that we're allowing the Land Use Commission to be able to do their job. And keep in mind, the Land Use Commission works with the Municipal Planning Council, people who live in the area, that can make the determination whether that sign's going to be unsafe, whether it's going to be intrusive or obstructive, as they make determinations on these variances. And so I'm asking that we allow the Land Use Commission to do their job, because we know Guam's roads are not very simple and land issues are very complex. And a sign that you can see from 100 feet with a sign face of 200 is not the same. Will be the same as a sign that's 200 feet away with a sign face of 400. And so we have to be able to account for those things, that maybe if we want to allow for a fair market, allow for equal advertising, that especially down south, that one company A or company B couldn't necessarily put a sign 100 feet from the road with the minimum. They might have to put it 300 feet at the road, at a decline or an incline, at a larger face, to allow for the same amount of saturation to the potential consumer. And that's fair is fair. And we need to allow these individuals to do their job. And all I'm asking is that we don't overly restrict. We allow the Land Use Commission, they're the experts. I don't sit on the commission. I'm not the one at the end of the day who's going to make the determination whether or not that sign is safe. The people on the ground going to those locations where the proposed permit's going to be are the ones that are going to look and make that, render that decision. And I think we just need to trust that that process is going to happen without being overly restrictive. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. On the Estevez amendment, is there any objection to the amendment? Senator Lee, was that an objection? So there's an objection to the amendment. All in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're good. Motion fails. Senator Estevez, you're recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The other amendment I have is going to be on lines 2 to 4, page 9. And it will read on item 2, sign face shall not exceed 200 square feet for digital signs and 400 square feet for static signs. Followed on, because they're tied intrinsically together, item 3, sign face dimensions shall not be obstructive or unsafe for motorists. And so again, this allows for the variance in terms of the size, because you may have to, with 3,500 restriction, that's really going to have a great effect on where you can put these signs. And so to allow them the flexibility to place these variances, because again, a sign at 400 feet away from the road at 400 feet will probably have the same impact as a sign that's 100 feet, that's 200 square feet on its face. And so to be able to account for those things. And so as long as I think that language is in there, that the dimensions shall not be too wide, too high, that it's going to be obstructive or unsafe for motorists, I think is reasonable in order to ensure that it's safe. Keep in mind, of all the traffic incidents we have, it's because lines aren't painted and for other reasons. Never has there been an accident because somebody was looking at a digital sign. In all those times those signs been up, have been up, we should make note. Furthermore, I would also like to note, as stated by the previous speaker, that we need to be very deliberate in this body in what we do. This body has made the consistent position and has made the determination to grandfather these signs that are already there. But keep in mind, this is new legislation. And so I would prefer, Madam Speaker, of my own personal opinion, that we address this and we look at what's actually been working well on the island and be very careful that we don't change this after grandfathering it and potentially put ourselves in a position where we have to find an answer out in a lawsuit. At this time, Madam Speaker, I understand that they have to reset the AV, so I'd like to make the motion to recess and maintain my time when I come back. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll stand in recess for 5 minutes.
amendment to the bill, and I'd like to just move it forward. Again, with the understanding that in terms of the visual spectrum, distance matters. And so for a static sign, as opposed to a digital sign, distance does not have as much of an effect on a digital sign because it protrudes light, whereas a static sign has that issue. And so at greater distances, a larger sign is necessary to achieve the same outcome. And in fact, at greater distances, it would probably be safer, potentially be safer, a safer option in terms of motorists. And so I asked my colleagues to please support this amendment. It was an amendment that was in the bill. I believe it's fair for a free and fair market. And again, it speaks to the issue of this body not providing a legal monopoly for particular companies. And number two, I think protects the government from potential lawsuits with adjusting the signs in terms of adjusting the requirements for the signs that are not necessarily consistent with the signs that are already installed and erected. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Ada, you are recognized on the Estevez amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I raise an objection to the amendment. And here's why. I have passed around this graphic which shows what a 200 square foot sign looks like and what a 400 square foot sign looks like. So the graphic that I'm showing as an example is the digital sign that is across from FHP next to the that new Camacho landmark building. Now, digital sign, static sign, it doesn't matter. When you look at it, it obstructs the vision, it obstructs the view of certain things. So with 200 square feet, a 200 square foot sign, it covers, the first, probably about half of that building on that Camacho landmark building. With a 400 square foot sign, it covers all the way up above the roof. So that's the implication of what a 400 square foot static sign, digital sign, doesn't matter. In fact, you could take that sign that's in front of, across from FHP, the 200 square foot, it's digital because you apply electricity to it to turn on lights, to make it change electronically, and not have to go out there and change the face of the sign. But what if he decides to turn off the switching of the pictures and uses an exterior floodlight? He could say, that's a static sign. So then now he can put up a 400 square foot sign. And what we're trying to meet here is the balance between allowing for the advertisement of information, but at the same time not to get this visual assault where I can't see that's a beautiful building behind there. And so we wanna avoid that sort of situation. We want to avoid the clutter. That's why we're putting in that restriction on the interval of 3,500 feet. So this is just an example of what is the implication of doubling the size, the sign face. And so with that, I stand in objection of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. On the Estevez amendment? On the Estevez amendment, if no one else would like to be recognized, Senator Estevez, you may close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm looking at these graphics and I appreciate them being promoted forward because, it does highlight the exact point I was making. Whenever we talk about regulations and whenever we talk about things about the island, we only talk about the north, we only talk about the central, we only talk about the most developed areas. And you could see it here. But what we don't discuss is how you're going to get advertisement for different events and small businesses in the South. We're only concerned with how a building looks. I get it. I understand that we have to look at and take it for the worst case scenario, and that people and the government won't be more cognizant of how they do the permits. But what I'm requesting here is a range, a variance range that's very specific on what the limitations are. Doesn't mean every single static sign is going to come out at 400 square feet. But this highlights the point that all we're concerned with is how it looks in the more densely populated areas. You think we're ever going to see a digital sign down in Zotnya, Umatic, Malesso? Probably not. But what we could see, a static sign that promotes certain things, like a private school down south that tries to increase their enrollments, or different festivities and activities, fiestas, public safety announcements. It's an affordable option for an area that this wouldn't be a problem. And we should, in 2018, Madam Speaker, be able to make determinations and see what is reasonable. I agree, maybe 400 square feet right here is not reasonable. I agree. But at Windward Hills Golf Course, it might be reasonable. Down in Epan, heading down south, might be reasonable. But if we don't allow for that type of discussion, if we only focus on one segment of the island, one segment of the population, then we're doing a disservice for the rest, an area that's been historically forgotten about or not discussed. And so with that, I ask my colleagues, this amendment has been in the bill, it passed, the merits have not changed, and all we're asking is a variation in the requirements, and let the professionals make the determination whether it's safe or not. Thank you.
Is there any objection to voting on the amendment as one unit? If not, then on the Estevez amendment, there's been an objection. All in favor, please raise your hand. You got it, Renee? Motion fails. Senator Estevez, you are recognized on the bill. On the bill, is there any senator who would like to be recognized? Senator San Nicolas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to rise and commend the work of the author. Earlier, when we encountered some of the challenges facing the existing sign laws, it really put the issue into perspective that we do have a commercial interest with respect to the industry of advertising, and we also have a community interest with respect to making sure that that advertising is not going to be distasteful. And so we have so many different ways of being able to regulate that, but this bill will actually outline and create the necessary framework for us to be able to move forward in this community in a very balanced fashion. And I really wasn't going to make too many remarks with respect to this bill because I believe the author worked on it, brought it to the floor, heard some remarks from colleagues, took it back, worked on it some more, and has brought it to the floor again. And I wanted to just extend my gratitude. You know, I'm from the South, Madam Speaker, and I don't think we need 400 square feet to be able to be advertised to. As a matter of fact, you know, one of the things that I really love about scenic driving down south is you can actually see the horizon and the landscape. And, you know, if 400 square feet blocking the Camacho Landmark building is something that, you know, we definitely don't want to be seeing up north. I certainly don't want to see my view of the valleys leading down to Fena being obstructed by a 400 square foot sign. That notwithstanding, one of the things that you do see in the south is those little signs by the side of the road advertising, you know, the fruit and vegetable stands or, you know, various other home industries. And those are almost, they're just such a nice reminder of the fact that we have an industrious community that is looking to help make ends meet and are wanting to attract people into their establishments, and they don't need 400 square feet to do it. And so I know that, you know, there's just some interest here with respect to trying to not be too restrictive, but at the same time not too obstructive. And the author, I think, really struck a good balance of that. If you go through the bill, you'll see pages upon pages of new language that seeks to create the framework, not just on a level that is enumerated in law, but also on a level that just plays to the various sensitivities and the intent. And I wanted to just rise and commend the author for the work, and I definitely look forward to supporting Bill 154-34. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator San Nicolas. Any other member wish to be heard on the main motion? Acting Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill number 154 would change our existing law. Currently, our law allows for on-premises signs, and it allows for those signs with restrictions. For example, your sign cannot exceed your rooftop. I know we've seen political signs put on rooftops, but businesses are not allowed to do that. Their signs have been very much restricted to fit a small percentage of the face of a building, and they've only been able to advertise businesses that operate on those premises. So this bill is a huge departure from existing law, because it will allow signs on any property on Guam, pretty much. Well, I take that back. It will allow signs on commercial, industrial, and light industrial properties that meet the requirements of this bill, and it will allow signs for any purpose, for any off-premises business or any other messaging that anyone wants to put on a billboard. There was some testimony on at the hearing of this bill that discussed, you know, whether that's what we want for Guam, whether we want Guam to be the place where, like Las Vegas, they compared it to Las Vegas, where we would have billboards everywhere, and or whether, and I think it was the woman from the Realtors Association of Guam that talked about, or whether that would intrude on our paradise, or, you know, our desire to, you know, just the aesthetics of Guam and how we market Guam to our tourists and for our own lives. How does that impede on our quality of life, to have our surroundings, your neighborhoods, with commercial signs everywhere or wherever they are allowed to fit them in under this bill, and down south, for example, impeding the views of, you know, our beautiful views. I mean, I drive from Jotnya to Agana every day, and I'm very blessed to drive down past Pago Bay and see the ocean. But wherever there's commercial or light industrial or industrial properties, from here on, those views may be impeded. And I just find it a little ironic, because this same legislature passed a bill earlier in this term to remove our ability, or the ability of people seeking office, such as senator or governor, to put signs on public property, because they thought signs, one of the arguments made was that signs were ugly. And so I just find it very ironic that we are going to replace our ugly political signs that try to encourage our people to get involved in their government, and we're going to replace those with commercial signs, commercial or any purpose signs, really. I also note that this bill was on the session floor not too long ago, and it was referred back to committee by Speaker Cruz, and he had some concerns that there were constitutional issues, that there was some vague language, and wanted those issues to be addressed. Well, the bill, as coming back from the committee, has not been amended, and the committee report, there's no additional testimony or language in this committee report that, to me, addresses the concerns as to constitutionality. There were other concerns that we tried to discuss with council. For example, these are the questions that remain as to, with this bill. And some of these were brought up earlier. How does this bill, which allows now off-premises sign, affect on-premises sign? Because the on-premise sign statutes would still be in place. Those are not being repealed or amended. So we would be more restricted advertising on our buildings where our businesses take place than we would be advertising on other property where our business is not taking place. The bill also, leaves some questions, I think, as to the biggest part that the biggest change that this bill is making is we have a few off-premises signs on Guam right now. And that's because this legislature also passed a bill earlier in this term to allow off-premises signs that had been declared illegal, void, that the Guam Land Use Commission had allowed, according to the Attorney General, in contradiction of the law. This legislature passed a bill to allow those signs anyways. And so we have right now off-premises signs. We have electronic billboards in several places in Tumon, Tamuning, and we have the static huge billboards that advertise other businesses that are not on the premises. So those are the exceptions to the law right now. But when those exceptions were made by the Guam Land Use Commission, at least the Guam Land Use Commission went through a very strenuous or detailed process that it does for all variances. It required public input. It required input of adjacent landowners. It required input of the Municipal Planning Council. And it required input from agencies, in particular from the Department of Agriculture, Historic Preservation Office, DPW, GPA, GWA, the Coastal Management Resource at the Bureau of Statistics and Plan, things like that, because it's the mission of the Guam Land Use Commission. When it reviews for variances, it's supposed to be reviewing what is the impact of allowing this at this place, what would be the impact of that on the lives of the people who live in this area, who are adjacent to this property, and so that's what they had to consider. And so even the people in the industry have given us testimony. I think almost on every one of them. I think I'm counting at least three businesses that have been active in the testimony to the legislature on this bill. And all of them said that they prefer that process of going through the Guam Land Use Commission, being scrutinized, ensuring that the public has input, ensuring that the municipal planning council of that area has input, that the agencies have input, that they think that process is transparent and it's fair. And yet this bill would take away that, well, it would allow that process on the exception, but what it does is actually give this authority solely to the Department of Public Works to grant, you submit an application and the Department of Public Works is pretty much required to grant you a permit to put your sign up if it meets the size requirements of, that are stated in this bill and the distance requirements that are stated in this bill. And I think that's significantly different than allowing an exceptional process at the Guam Land Use Commission to grant variances. And I was hoping that when this bill was referred back to committee that would be considered more because of the testimony of all the people in the industry who seem to favor that process. This bill also distinguishes between commercial and industrial property and residential and agricultural property. So your huge tract of agricultural property up there, perhaps across from GRMC or across, in the south, is going to be treated differently than maybe a very small piece of commercial property that you own in a nearby area. I was wondering as to the constitutional impacts of that. It doesn't seem, well, I'm not sure the rationale behind the distinguishing between these property owners for this purpose. If the premise is that signs are harmless and they don't interfere with our quality of life. I'm also concerned about the distance requirements. I think this is the part that for me is just I'm thankful for the sponsor of the bill's efforts to show us illustrations and things because those are very helpful. And one of the but I guess I'm trying to get my head around this part about you can't if I put my sign down first, you can't put another sign down for 3,500 feet. And that very much impacts all the property, as he said, between ITC and Citibank. And when you look at other villages, I mean, that's significant. And it does seem very much to favor those businesses who have been grandfathered in. They've got their electronic signs up, and I guess I'm not sure it's clear by this bill whether the 3,500 feet starts, like we're saying, from ITC because that's where the existing sign is, and therefore gives them an advantage. And everybody else, has to work out from the largest intersection on Guam, perhaps, And I suspect, only a few people can own the biggest intersections on Guam. And so I just think, I'm not sure that, I don't feel confident that this bill is fair in that way, restricting our, by saying, signs are good, yet we're going to restrict everybody, between here. And I'm not sure from Magana, 3,500 feet going south, how far that would be, right? Anyways, I'm just saying, I'm sure you can all think of examples like that where it would have I'm not sure, it could pass by the entire village, right? You're in another village by the time 3,500 feet ends in some cases, perhaps. I just think that we really, as a legislature, should be cautious against removing that opportunity. We just passed, it was just the 33rd Guam Legislature that passed a bill that required, that mandated Municipal Planning Council input on all variances. It strengthened their ability to have input in the process. And this bill seems to do the opposite by removing that. And I think that's the wrong way to go. And I'm also worried that because the Guam Land Use Commission, for example, is not going to be reviewing the content of the signs or what their designs are and what, how it would look in front of this one building or adjacent to this, playground or school or anything, there's none of those factors are considered. And so I think I brought this up the last time, that this bill makes possible that we have advertising, for example, for massage parlors adjacent to, in our villages, adjacent to our churches. And we have a bill on the session floor this session to rezone all of the property in Jigo, I think along Marine Drive adjacent to the church. And just things like that. I mean, these are going to change Guam forever. This type of legislation will change Guam forever. And we have heard from the industry, I think even they are saying, there's a process that should be more transparent, more community involvement, and yet we have not heard that much from anyone else outside of the industry, except for the Realtors Association, Senator Klitsky, who said, do we want Las Vegas or do we want Santa Fe, right? That's the two he was comparing. And I noticed from one of the testimonies submitted from, one of the industry representatives, that he gave us a chart of all the states. And there are states, and I think this was also pointed out by the realtors, for example, Hawaii. Hawaii has a ban on all commercial signs. No off-premises signs at all. That's why you don't see those billboards in Hawaii. Because Hawaii is advertising paradise. It's advertising its views, its trees, its greenery, its oceans, and its clear air space. And I think for me, and I just think about my village where I grew up, and I feel like that's what we want for Guam. That is why we are here. That is our advantage in advertising to tourists, but it's really our advantage in raising our children, is that we are not going to put commercial profit over everything, that we have standards in our community for our quality of life that are going to protect us from the clutter of commercial signs. The bill does not address also the problems that we have with the enforcement of current signs. And enforcement of current signs is a function of DPW. And we've talked about this before in here, the challenges that DPW faces in enforcing existing sign laws. That was one of the reasons, because, for example, political signs have had very strict rules. You had to take them down at certain times. You couldn't, you had to remove all the pegs. But one of the reasons for banning political signs again was because DPW could not enforce adequately, all the provisions of the signs, and therefore, our safety was at risk because of these signs. And so I just feel like we really, DPW is the entity that has not weighed in on this bill at all. And there's, besides giving them pretty much the total authority to permit these signs and to enforce, it's not clear. I mean, they're going to be getting a $400 fee per sign, I think, and it's just not clear to me how DPW in its current state is going to be able to enforce this additional law. My other the other issue I want to raise is that when the GLUC approved those electronic signs that the legislature subsequently endorsed or made legal, the GLUC put on those sign owners conditions. And so those conditions were aimed at meeting, more community purposes. For example, one of the examples that they cited was they had required the owners to include a certain number of public service hours in the advertisement for free, right? And because it's not clear the interaction of this bill and our existing laws, it's unclear to me, are those owners then off the hook after this legislation? Are those owners on the hook yet for that public service, yet everyone else who puts up an electronic sign, they will not be required to do that public service? So in general, I very much appreciate the efforts that have gone into this bill, and I understand the competing interests that we are facing. We are facing allowing businesses to advertise, allowing use of our properties, but I think we're also, facing, we're talking about, 30 years at least since the Department of Land Management was established. I think I calculated that, I can't remember right now, but something like that, that we have not allowed signs like this to be put on Guam. And I just feel like this huge departure really should have more community involvement, and not just those from the sign industry telling us what they think about this bill. And so we've had a couple, like I said, Senator Klitsky and the realtors, but I feel like I understand the efforts of the author. He's had a public hearing on this, but I really feel like this is a bill that should not be rushed because of the implications it's going to have for Guam forever, and because it's very hard to take away this type of a privilege after you grant it to a landowner or a business owner. And I just say, let's just be cautious, let's not rush into this, let's hold off on it, and let's really do more to get more community input. For example, what does Inarahan think about putting commercial signs and billboards and off-premises electronic signs in its village? I think we should hear from them. And there may be villages that say they want this, but
I apologize, Acting Speaker. Do you have a question that you'd like to yield to the author?
No.
Because we're on just the time.
Okay, thanks. Yes, I'll wrap it up, Madam Speaker. I believe we can afford more opportunity for the public to be heard on such a massive policy shift as this. And I agree with the few that did testify that said that this bill would allow for clutter, and it detracts from the image of Guam that we want to portray and how we want to raise our children. So I would ask my colleagues to please consider that, and if we can, hold off on this bill until we can get some additional input from the community. And I regret that it is the end of the term, and so that the current sponsor of the bill, I understand why this is very important for him to get it passed right now, but I would ask that, if someone else could be trusted to carry that torch, and just to get additional input from the community, perhaps to change the bill to go back to a GLUC process where it mandates community input. Sujuas Masi, Madam Speaker.
Sujuas Masi. Senator Eswaldon, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, the previous speaker brought up several points which we can agree or disagree upon in terms of voting for this legislation. However, that being said, she did raise some points about constitutionality issues. And so I believe it's probably in our best interest, right, to set this bill aside for now to allow legal counsel to take a look if there are any constitutional issues with this bill. I mean, it seems that from the discussion or the testimony of the previous speaker, perhaps an equal protection issue was raised, and that goes to the constitutionality of this legislation. There may also be a freedom of speech issue in this. And I'm not asking to take it off the agenda. I'm just asking if we can set this aside for a day or two, allow legal counsel to take a look at the possible constitutionality of some of these issues, and then from there move on with the discussion. But I believe it's in our best interest, because if we are to pass this legislation, in the event it does pass, the constitutionality of it becomes the central issue. Are we passing something that might go against the Organic Act or the Constitution? So I'm moving that we set this aside for a day or two to allow legal counsel to further look at those issues.
Thank you, Senator Espaldon. On the motion to set aside, any member wish to be heard? Senator Atta, you're recognized. I apologize. Senator St. and then Senator Atta.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Part of our process when we bring a bill to the floor is it does go through legal counsel first before it even gets referred. And we have a phenomenal legal team that I think does a very, very good job of being able to scrub through bills and inform us whether or not there's going to be any kind of constitutionality questions. To be quite frank, Madam Speaker, some of the constitutionality concerns that were raised are just pretty plain and simple to me. For example, one of them was whether or not there's a constitutional question as to if we can limit signs to commercial and industrial properties and disallow them on agricultural properties. And Madam Speaker, we allow and disallow certain things on certain zone properties for the specific purpose of having those zones used for the reasons that they are established. Agricultural zones are for farming, so they're not supposed to be for advertising. And that's why we don't have that authorized in the bill. We can raise the question of constitutionality, and it does provide for a very weighty argument, but it doesn't mean that it's actually a legitimate argument. And I'm concerned of the idea that if we just say that there's a constitutional question, we're going to set everything aside and put it to legal counsel, when legal counsel already reviews the bills before they even go into referral process, I think is a repeating of the same process that we've already established in order to prevent us from moving forward legislation that has constitutional questions. On top of that, Madam Speaker, it's not the role of this legislative body to adjudicate constitutional challenges. That's why we have a court system. But that notwithstanding, we still vet the legislation here, and it's also vetted at the governor's office. When the bill passes here in the legislature and it goes to the administration, their legal looks at it. And if their legal finds any kind of enforcement challenges, particularly in areas of constitutionality, Organic Act challenges, or even inconsistencies of local law, the governor also has their legal office review it, and they can send it down for a veto. With all those points, Madam Speaker, there is the final arbiter, which would be the courts. If we pass a bill that has those kind of challenges that are legitimate challenges, then the parties that are affected can take it to the courts for adjudication. But, Madam Speaker, I was listening very intently to some of the questions of constitutionality, and like I said, you can raise that point to put weight behind the argument, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has merit, and I'm very concerned with the practice of us sending a bill to be reviewed by legal counsel just because somebody said that there might be constitutional questions. I think what we need to be able to do as lawmakers is discern whether or not those items that are being raised are actually bona fide, and if they're not, I think we should consult legal individually. We do have a whole week before we're going to probably be voting on the bills, but I'm just not a fan of the idea that we can raise those kind of points ad hominem and not move forward on legislation because we're going to put it through the same process all over again. So I respectfully object to the motion, Madam Speaker. I think it's a good time for us now to continue moving this legislation forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator St. There's been an objection, and Senator Atta, I'll recognize you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I too rise an objection to set aside the bill so that we can comb through it more and bring it to perfection where everybody is just so comfortable. And if we take that approach, nothing's never going to get out of the starting gate. Now, an earlier speaker raised a number of questions. Why we should not, the 101 reasons why we should not even consider this bill. One question was, how does Bill 154 affect the existing 40-year-old on-premise sign law? It does not. 154 deals with the authorizing of the off-premise signs, which our current law does not allow for. So it expands the authorization for signage.
Point of order, Madam Speaker. The motion is to refer the bill back to committee because of...
So, Madam Speaker, I am trying to explain why it should not.
Thank you, Acting Speaker. Thank you, Acting Speaker. Senator Atta, you may continue.
So the motion came up after the earlier speaker planted these seeds of doubt in people's minds. So I would like to have an opportunity to remove those seeds of doubt. There was the comment that was made that the GLUC process is better because it was more transparent and that the municipalities had a chance to speak on it.
As a point of order, Madam Speaker, if I may. The only issue that I had raised in my motion was to allow the legal counsel to review a constitutionality issue, not specifically to address any of the arguments the previous speaker had made of why she was either for or against this legislation. It was only a motion to allow the bill to be set aside temporarily for a day or two to allow legal counsel to determine whether there is, in fact, a constitutionality issue that needs to be dealt with.
Thank you for clarifying, Senator Espadon. Senator Atta, you can please continue.
So the remarks were made that the GLUC process is better because...
Point of order, Madam Speaker. These comments are not... They're debating what I said, which he can do on his closing,
Acting
but
Speaker?
this is on a motion.
Yes, so Senator, I inadvertently recognized Senator Atta and then recognized Senator Nicholas. He has an objection to the motion that was made, and so I'm just allowing Senator Atta to also raise his points for objection. So Senator Atta, you can continue.
So fine, Madam Speaker, I too rise an objection and I say let's call for the vote.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard on the objection, or the motion to set aside Bill 154 to allow legal counsel to review it in the next day or so? Senator Espadon? Senator Esteves, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Obviously there's a lot of discussion. I do know it goes through the process, but I also know that our legal bureau is understaffed and there's a lot of work that goes into that. However, this is what the discussion on the floor this is what occurs on the floor. I think I agree with the mover of the motion that it requires further review. There's a stark difference, equal protections difference, when there's a government restriction on what people can do on their private land because of regulations that affect everybody. But I think it's a very different issue when you're restricted at what you can do on your property because of what somebody else is doing, especially when it's because they were just the ones that did it first. And I think, we do have outstanding legal counsel, and I don't think it's going to take them long to potentially double check that, but I'm very concerned with that being a potential issue. Yeah, I understand that the courts can adjudicate this, but these are not lawsuits we want to be involved in. We're trying to save money. And so if this body, with the fiduciary responsibility, can be reasonable, can be objective, and can be thorough, and I think it's a reasonable request. We have plenty of time and plenty of things on the agenda before we even vote on the measure to just get some additional clarification so that members of this body, all duly elected, could have some of their concerns alleviated. So I do support the motion, and I do support the bill. And as a member of this body, in my own opinion, I would just like to hear what more can be said on the things that have been discussed today.
Thank you very much, Senator Estevez. I'd like to call for a brief 1-minute recess. The legislature is back in session. Colleagues, we will recess today, and then we will resume our session tomorrow at 10 a.m.